This is a surge tank, and today I'm going to be putting this inside the Turbo Falcon.
Aftermarket Industries is back as the sponsor for this video with the FS1000 drop-in surge tank. This surge tank can handle anywhere between 600 and 1400 horsepower depending on configuration. And when I say drop in, I literally mean drop in. This thing goes where the factory fuel pump hanger would normally go. And this is actually a really clever design and has some advantages over other options on the market. They've sent me this kit in the 600 horsepower configuration because that'll support my needs. For now at least. We've got the surge tank, a pre-terminated harness to plug into the factory Falcon wiring. This is actually made from mil-spec wiring, a plug for the fuel level sender, this nice new locking ring to hold the surge tank in. It also comes with quick connect hoses to connect the tank to your factory fuel lines, and the fuel rail adapter kit that was in my previous video. Now let's open this up and have a look at what's inside. As you can see, everything is already hooked up out of the box. It's got a 535 fuel pump with a nice mesh filter. Here's our provision for a second fuel pump. Because this surge tank drops into the fuel tank, it actually uses the Venturi effect to draw fuel up into the surge tank where it won't get sloshed around by G-forces, providing you fuel even under high acceleration or high turning. To install this surge tank, it's pretty straightforward. First, we need to remove the back seat, then pop this cover off to get access to the factory fuel hanger. Next, we need to disconnect these fuel lines and the wiring. Now, if you were sensible, you probably would have purged the fuel lines prior to opening this stuff up and disconnecting them. If you were a little bit silly, you would just go gung-ho and have to get a towel and clean the fuel up after it spills everywhere. There is a proper tool to remove this locking ring, but if you want to just use a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer, it works just as well. Next, we lift the hanger out of the fuel tank. Be careful not to yank on it too hard and break the level sender wiring. You're going to have to reach up underneath to be able to disconnect it.
That's quite a lot of fuel in there. This is going to make a fucking mess. Oh no! Oh, fucker.
Comparing the Aftermarket Industries surge tank to the factory hanger, the differences are obvious immediately. Like, the materials used in this are way higher quality, it feels better. This is pretty obviously cheap plastic. This even feels heavier than the factory hanger. As you can see, the next most obvious thing is that one's sealed as a complete unit and the other one's open. That's because the Aftermarket Industries surge tank actually acts as a Venturi pump. As fuel is returned into the system, it actually causes suction, which lifts more fuel up into the surge tank. You obviously can't do that with the factory hanger. And as you can see, this thing is way bigger than the factory hanger. There's no provision in the factory hanger for a second fuel pump. You'll never be able to fit a second fuel pump, whereas the Aftermarket Industries surge tank is designed specifically to be able to handle two. Now, let's get it installed in the car. First step is getting the fuel level sender connected to the surge tank wiring. Now, all this takes is cutting off the existing plug and wiring up the new high quality plug that's provided by Aftermarket Industries.
Let's get this bad boy in around the edges. Alright, so now I should just be able to submerge this, drop the surge tank in. It feels so wrong putting wiring in a liquid. I'm just trying to make sure the gasket is seated properly, and then I need to work out the correct orientation for all of this. This is my return line, this is my sender. This wiring is going to plug in, this harness is going to plug in, so I might need to clock this slightly differently just to have it all nice and neat and plug in properly. But before I actually plug any of that in, I need to put the retaining ring in and lock it in place. So I'm going to try and get it, I'm going to plug this plug in first and then try and get this oriented more or less where I need it to be. Then I'll drop the retaining ring in.
Speaking of wiring, let's talk about why in this configuration, I can actually just hook straight up to the factory fuel pump wiring. The common knowledge in Ford Falcons is that as soon as you install a 460 fuel pump or anything higher, you're at massive risk of melting plugs or even starting fires. The thing is, the common knowledge isn't really that accurate. Let's talk about some fuel system basics so we can understand what's going on. If you're not interested in learning, skip to this time code. First, we have base fuel pressure. This is the fuel pressure your system is aiming to achieve as its baseline. So we turn the car on, it's idling, and it should be sitting at base fuel pressure. In our system, let's call it 40 psi because that's what I'm using. When you put your foot on the throttle, you add boost, which pressurizes your intake manifold. As this happens, the difference in pressure between your intake manifold and fuel rail increases. Your fuel system then has to compensate for this difference in pressure. This is called working fuel pressure, and this can be expressed as simply base fuel pressure plus boost pressure. So if we have a base fuel pressure of 40 psi and then we're adding 20 psi of boost, our working fuel pressure is 60 psi. Next, we need to understand how our fuel pressure affects our fuel pump. A fuel pump's efficiency is measured by the amount of fuel it can deliver at a given fuel pressure and voltage. So across a range of fuel pressures and voltage, you will actually see the fuel pump's efficiency change. This is going to be different with every fuel pump, and other factors also affect this, but today we're just sticking with the basics. As the fuel pressure goes up, the fuel pump has to draw more power because it has to work harder to pump the fuel. And as the fuel pump has to work harder to pump the fuel, the efficiency that it does it goes down. This is because the fuel pump is experiencing frictional forces from the high fuel pressure. So even as the fuel pump works harder and harder and more power is being drawn, less and less fuel is being moved. And what you end up seeing is this diminishing return where as you push the fuel pump harder, you're getting less and less fuel for the amount that you're pushing it and the amount of power that you're drawing. At this point, it should be pretty obvious what causes these failures in Falcon fuel pump wiring and why it's almost always the connectors. It's because this is the area with the highest resistance. As the fuel pressure goes up and the pump has to work harder and harder to try and push the same amount of fuel, the amount of power being drawn goes up more and more, and these connectors become a bottleneck where eventually they end up being too hot, overloaded, they melt, they burn out. It's also shockingly common for supposedly knowledgeable mechanics and workshops to not have a clue how electricity or wiring works and do some truly shocking work when it comes to fuel pump electrical systems. I mean, we're talking about using connectors that are copper and way too small for the amount of current being drawn, or not even using connectors at all, just twisting some wires together, wrapping them in electrical tape and calling it a day. Obviously, connectors that are too small or just wrapping wires together causes even more resistance, and as a result, causes this stuff to burn out and fail. Why is it then that I can use the factory wiring harness without worrying about melting things? Well, it's because my fuel pressure just isn't getting high enough to cause the pump to try and draw more current than the system can handle. Remember, I've got the Aftermarket Industries fuel rail adapter. This removes the restriction on the return line, allowing for higher flow, and I can have lower fuel pressures as a result. My base fuel pressure is 40 psi, which is the most efficient fuel pressure for the 535 pump to operate at. And I'm only adding about 14 pounds of additional pressure through boost, which means that I'm barely pushing this fuel pump beyond its most efficient operating pressure, which in turn means that I'm not drawing enough current to put the factory harness as well as the mil-spec harness that Aftermarket Industries provides with this kit at any risk. Now, if I had two fuel pumps or even just one fuel pump that draws more current, it would be a different story, and I would have to replace the factory wiring with a better, bigger mil-spec harness, which is exactly what Aftermarket Industries does in their setups that are to support higher power configurations. All right, we've got all of our wiring hooked up. We've got our fuel lines hooked up. Everything's all done and ready to go. It's now time to start the car and do a test drive. Now, I'll switch this over to AFR. It's not going to read a correct AFR for a little bit because it needs to warm up, but First, yeah, it's gonna read pretty lean for a little bit while it warms up the sensor. Let's check our fuel pressure. Perfect 40 PSI. One of the other big things about using this drop-in surge tank is you just can't hear anything. Can't hear any whiny fuel pumps. Obviously, once there's a second one in there, it'll be a little bit louder, but man, I am so used to hearing whiny fuel pumps from, you know, cells in the boot or from in the engine bay. That thing is crazy quiet being mounted down there in the fuel tank. Alright, I'll wait for the car to warm up and then we'll go for a little drive. Overall, I'd say this Aftermarket Industries surge tank was really easy to install. It's actually kind of incredible how simple it is once you understand how it works and how to install it, and that it can handle, in the right configuration, 1400 horsepower. But I mean, they've got the results. There's a whole heap of Falcons, Commodores, other cars running this system or systems similar to it and achieving incredible numbers. I really like that it just drops straight into the fuel tank instead of having to risk a defect or some kind of damage when you have a crash because it's, you know, bolted up to your chassis rail or something like that. This thing just goes straight in. It so naturally fits in with the rest of the car. You don't have to listen to fuel pump whine either because it's already tucked away under the back seat and everything like that. Overall, this is great. I can't wait to test it at the track. In one of my future videos, I'm going to take this to the track because Aftermarket Industries claim that you can keep on the power down to 5% of your fuel tank. 5%. So I'm going to put my engine and my stuff at risk and take the car to the track and run it right down to the red and see if this surge tank can perform as well as they claim it does. Anyway, don't forget to use my link in the description or code FG mods. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.